Yes, I'm checking my audio levels. Can you tell that I'm checking my audio levels? I'm not doing anything serious at all right now. Audio? I can hear audio. Oh, look at that. Stream Elements actually posted the right message for once. Are my samplers going to work today? No, of course not. Because that is just so freaking typical. Don't know why that's doing it. I wish I knew why. Because it kind of bites. And it's as annoying as... No, that didn't do the blurb on it. Ugh. Sound alerts, you disappoint me. I really wish it would work. I like my sound alerts. I picked and chose them and recorded my own. But no, they just don't want to work. Because, I don't know. If anyone wants to be a mod and have access to my sound alerts, by all means, just ask. Because them not working is killing me here. I guess not really killing me. They're useless. Useless, I say. I mean, come on, dude. Give me my freaking sound alerts already. Alright. Do my blurbs work? This isn't one of mine. It didn't play anyway. My blurb's not even logged in. What the hell? And I'm just out of touch. I don't know who the hell Shawn Mendes is. Did not lock me in? Okay. Where are my synths? Okay, here's one of mine. Is it gonna play? No, of course not. Wait. Yeah, Blurbs is on here. Don't know what's not playing. Set on all tracks. Why is it only 53% though? hear this one? Nope, it got cut off too. I don't know what the hell is on with my sound. Why do my sounds not want to work? Everything looks like it's set up right. I can't think of any reason why it's not going through. I don't know, Cubs. That bothers me. Okay, let's check to see if the Twitter message actually went through, because don't see it. Why am I singing? I don't know. Oh, okay, well, it says it's posted. Good, good. It does say that I'm online. That's cool. Oh, hand cramp. That's never fun. Eh. Everyone's on my Twitter post. It seems that I'm mostly Scottish. Scottish. This kind of goes from me being a Fenris of Git. But well. Yes, if you see anything cool, clip it. Because I don't have any clips that I know of. Do I have any clips? Okay, I'm going to do that. Oh, I can't rate my own stream. That's funny. Huh, okay. I can't use my own React reaction. Oh. That's just one of those days. I think I have unfollowed 13 or 14 people playing Hogwarts Legacy now. Kind of bummed about it. There's some more people that I was helping get affiliated. Hell, Merriweather was one of them. And that being said, I'm only unfollowing them on Twitch. I'm not unfollowing them elsewhere. Oh, well, there's another one. Damn it. Yep. Another pre-affiliate. Dang it. I mean, I really wanted to play that game, but I just can't stand by the creator. Even if she doesn't have anything directly tied into the game itself, the game itself is, racist. So, yeah. Of course, it's inferred racism, but still. You can't have fantasy without there being races, and, Wild Sandycast. Cool. I don't know if I want to time that out or not. I don't know. Let me get ads out of the way real quick, if you cubs don't mind. Just running a minute of them. I'm not going to start reading yet, so. Pre-roll ads are disabled for 21 minutes. Cool. As I just want to get the ads out of the way. So, hopefully they won't interact or mess up with story time, so. I don't have myself on here. I try to have a window up of me non-sub. Oh, I can't even spell my name right. Oh, the humanity. Okay. Oh, well, Sandy guest escaped. Damn it. Okay. Do 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 do. Now I had the time of my life. Oh. Avers has liked the tweet. That's good, I guess. Okay. Well, let me tweet with the actual subject so that just kind of have the moments to the generic. So I will post the one saying I'm doing Sherlock Holmes, Part 5. Because we're on Part 5 of Sherlock Holmes. Ouch. And my ankle just popped very loudly. I don't know if anyone heard it except me. Oh. We're not quite at 9:10 yet. Hey, there's. I hope everyone's had a good week. Weather hasn't killed you all or anything like that. Because weather has been a bear here. Oh, not so much a bear, because bears are at least warm. But freezing thing was kind of a pain in my tail. Bright sunshine, freezing weather, lovely. I was drinking. My mouth does that when I drink. I've got two beverages. One, the Mountain Dew Pitch Black variety, because I like grape Mountain Dew. Ooh, I did not even know what to do. Nah, I don't need that. And my other, I have a Pepsi Zero, because for some reason the United States refuses to call it Max. Ah. 9:09. I guess I should go over to the reading screen. What do you think? Of course, we're using study for the reading screens for Sherlock Holmes because Sherlock Holmes is cool and deserves his own reading screen.
Gantt charts. Here's how easily you can build one in ClickUp. Let's map out the tasks for your Gantt chart in this list. Perfect. Now, let's add a Gantt view.
What the hell?
Set the dates for your tasks, and voila, we've got a Gantt chart.
Okay, so my audio fireplace that you can't see because it's behind the book was playing an ad. Hear the fireplace? I can barely hear it. Oh, there it is. Don't everything sound like it's on fire or anything. But we are at 9:10 or 21:10, whichever way we want to say it. So, let's get into the book, shall we? Our first story for the evening. The Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb. Of all the problems which have been submitted to my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes for solution during the years of our intimacy, there were only two which I was the means of introducing to his notice. That of Mr. Hatherley's thumb, and that of Colonel Warburton's madness. Of these, the latter may have afforded a finer field for an acute and original observer, but the other was so strange in its inception, and so dramatic in its details, that it may be more worthy of being placed upon record, even if it gave my friend fewer openings for those deductive methods of reasoning by which he achieved such remarkable results. The story has, as I believe, been told more than once in the newspapers, but like all such narratives, its effect is much less striking when set forth in block in a single half-column of print than when the facts slowly evolve before your own eyes, and the mystery clears gradually away from each new discovery furnishes a step which leads on to the complete truth. At the time of the circumstances made a deep impression upon me, and the lapse of 2 years was hardly served to weaken the effect. It was the summer of '89, not long after my marriage, that the events occurred which I am now about to summarize. I had returned to civil practice and had finally abandoned Holmes in his Baker Street rooms, although I continually visited him and occasionally even persuaded him to forego his bohemian habits as far as to come and visit us. My practice had steadily increased, and as I happened to live no great distance from Paddington Station, I got a few patients from among the officials. One of these, whom I had cured of a painful and lingering disease, was never weary of advertising my virtues and of endeavoring to send me on every sufferer over whom he might have any influence. One morning, at a little before 7 o'clock, I was awakened by the maid tapping at the door to announce that 2 men had come from Paddington and were waiting me in the consulting room. I dressed hurriedly, for I knew by experience that railway cases were seldom trivial, and hastened downstairs. As I descended, my old ally, the guard, came out from my room and closed the door tightly behind him. "I've got him here," he whispered, jerking his thumb over his shoulder. "He's all right." "What is it, then?" I asked, for his manner suggested that it was some strange creature that he had caged up in my room. "It's a new patient," he whispered. "I thought I'd bring him round myself, then he couldn't slip away. There he is, all safe and sound. I must go now, Doctor. I have my duties, just the same as you." And off he went, this trusty tout, without even giving me the time to thank him. "Good evening, Guilty." I entered my consulting room and found a gentleman seated by my table. He was quietly dressed in a suit of heather tweed with a soft cloth cap, which he had laid upon my books. Round one of his hands he had a handkerchief wrapped, which was mottled all over with bloodstains. He was young, not more than 25, I would say, with a strong masculine face, but he was exceedingly pale and gave me the impression of a man who was suffering from some strong agitation, which it took all his strength of mind to control. "I'm sorry to knock you up so early, Doctor," said he, "but I have had a very serious accident during the night. I came by in train this morning and inquiring on Paddington as to where I might find a doctor, a worthy fellow of kindly escorting me here. I gave the maid my card, but I see that she has left it upon the table side." I took it up and glanced at it. "Mr. Victor Hatherley, hydraulic engineer, 16A Victoria Street, 3rd floor." That was the name, style, and abode of my morning visitor. "I regret that I have kept you waiting," I said, sitting down in my library chair. "You are fresh from a night journey, I understand, which is in itself a monotonous occupation." My night could not be called monotonous," said he, and laughed. He laughed very heartily, with a high, ringing voice, leaning back in his chair and shaking his sides. All my medical instincts rose up against that laugh. "Stop it," I cried. "Pull yourself together." And I poured out some water from a carafe. It was useless, however. He was off on one of those hysterical outbursts which come upon a strong nature when some great crisis is over and gone. Presently he came to himself once more, very weary and pale-looking. "I've been making a fool of myself," he gasped. "Not at all. Drink this." I dashed some brandy into the water, and the color began to come back to his bloodlined cheeks. "That's better," he said. "And now, Doctor, perhaps you would be so kindly as to attend to my thumb, or rather, the place where my thumb used to be." He admired the handkerchief and held out his hand. It gave even my hardened nerves a shudder to look at it. There were 4 protruding fingers and a horrid red spongy surface where the thumb should have been. It had been hacked or torn right off from its roots. Yikes. "Good heavens!" I cried. "This is a terrible injury. It must have bled considerably." "Yes, it did. I fainted when it was done, and I think that I must have been senseless for a long time. When I came to, I found that it was still bleeding. I tied one end of my handkerchief very tightly around my wrist and braced it up like a twig." "Excellent. You should have been a surgeon." "It's a question of hydraulics, you see. It came in of my own providence." "This has been done," said I, examining the wound, "by a very heavy and sharp instrument." "A thing like a cleaver," he said. "By accident, I presume?" "By no means." "What? A murderous attack?" "Very murderous indeed." "You horrify me." I sponged the wound, cleaned it, dressed it, and finally covered it with a cotton wadding and carbonized the bandages. I lay back without wincing, though he bit his lip from time to time. "How is that?" I asked when I had finished. "Capital. Between your brandy and your bandage, I feel like a new man. I was very weak, and I have had a good deal to go through." "Perhaps you had better not speak of the matter. It is evidently trying on your nerves." "Oh, no, not now. I shall have to tell you my tale to the police, and between ourselves. If it were not for the convincing evidence of this wound of mine, I should be surprised that it believed my statement, for it is a very extraordinary one, and I believe not much in the way of proof which I have to back it up, and even if they believe me, the clues which I give them are so vague that it is a question whether justice will be done." "Ah," I cried, "if it is anything of the nature of a problem in which you desire to be solved, I should strongly recommend you come to my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, before you go to the official police." "Aye, I've heard of that fellow," answered my visitor, "and I should be very glad if he would take up the matter, though of course I must use the official police as well. Will you give me an introduction to him?" I'll do better. I'll take you round to him myself. I shall be immensely obliged to you. We'll call a cab and go together. We shall just be in time to have a little breakfast with him. Do you feel equal to it? Yes, I shall not feel easy until I've told my story. Then my servant will call a cab, and I shall be with you in an instant. I rushed upstairs, explained the matter shortly to my wife, and in 5 minutes was within the hansom, driving with my new acquaintance to Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes was, as I expected, lounging about his sitting room in his dressing gown, reading the agony columns of the Times, and smoking his before-breakfast pipe, which was composed of all the plugs and dottles left from his smokes of the day before, and carefully dried and collected in the corner of the mantelpiece. He received us in his high, genial fashion, ordered fresh rashers and eggs, and joined us in a hearty meal. When it was concluded, he settled our new acquaintance upon the sofa, placed a pillow beneath his head, and laid in a glass of brandy and water within its reach. It is easy to see from your experience has been no common one, Mr. Hatherley, he said. Pray, lie down there, and make yourself absolutely at home. Tell us what you can, but stop when you are tired, and keep your strength with what little stimulant. Thank ye, said my patient. But I have felt another man since the doctor bandaged me, and I think that your breakfast has completed the cure. I shall take up as little of your valuable time as possible, so I shall start at once upon my peculiar experiences. Holmes sat in his big armchair with the weary, heavy-lidded expression which veiled his keen and eager nature, while I sat opposite him, and we listened in silence to the strange story which our visitor detailed to us. You must know, said he, that I am an orphan and a bachelor, residing alone in the lodgings of London. My profession is, I'm a hydraulic engineer, and I have considerable experience of my work during the 7 years I was apprenticed to Veneer and Matheson, the well-known firm of Greenwich. 2 years ago, having served my time, and also having a fair sum of money through my father's poor health, I determined to start a business for myself, and took professional chambers in Victoria Street. I suppose that everyone finds his first independent start in business a dreary experience. To me, it has been exceptionally so. During 2 years, I've had 3 consultations and 1 small job, and that is obviously all that my profession has brought me. My gross takings have been about £27 10 silver. Every day from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, I waited in my little den until at last my heart began to sink, and I came to believe that I should never have any practice at all. Yesterday, however, just as I was thinking of leaving the office, my clerk entered to say there was a gentleman waiting who wished to see me upon business. He brought up a card with the name Colonel Leonard Stock engraved on it. Close at his heels came the colonel himself, rather middle-sized man, of an exceeding thinness. I do not think that I have ever seen so thin a man. His whole face sharpened away at the nose and chin, and the skin of his cheeks were drawn quite tense over his outstanding bones. Yet this emaciation seemed to be his natural habit, and due to no disease, for his eye was bright, his step brisk, and his bearing assured. But he was plainly but neatly dressed for his age, I should judge. Would be nearer 40 than 30. Mr. Hatherley, he said, in something of a German accent, you have been recommended to me, Mr. Hatherley, as being a man who is not only proficient in his profession, but is also discreet and capable of preserving a secret. I bowed, feeling flattered as any young man would in such an address. May I ask who it was who gave me such a good character? Well, perhaps it was better that I should not tell you at the moment. I have it from the same source that you are both an orphan and a bachelor, and are residing alone in London. That is quite correct, I answered, but you will excuse me if I say that I cannot see how this bears upon my professional qualifications. I understand that it is on a professional matter that you wish to speak to me? Undoubtedly so. But you will find that all I say is really to the point. I have a professional commission for you. But absolute secrecy is quite essential. Absolute secrecy. You understand. And of course we may expect that more from a man who is alone than from one who lives in the bosom of his family. Good point. If I promise to keep a secret, said I, you may absolutely depend on me doing so. He looked very hard at me as I spoke, and it seemed to me that I had never seen so suspicious and questioning an eye. Do you promise, then? He said at last. Yes, I promise. Absolute and complete silence before, during, and after, and no reference to the matter at all, either in word or writing. I've already given my word. Very good. He suddenly sprang up, and darting like lightning across the room, he flung the door open. The passage outside was empty. Well, that's all right, he said, coming back. I know the clerks are somewhat times curious of their master's affairs. Now we can talk in safely. He drew up his chair very close to mine and began to stare at me with the same questioning and thoughtful look. A feeling of repulsion, of something akin to fear, began to rise within me at the strange antics of this fleshless man. Even my dread of losing a client could not restrain me from showing my impatience. I beg that you will state your business, sir, said I. My time is of value. Heaven forgive me for the last sentence, but the words came to my lips. How would 50 guineas for a night's work suit you? He asked. Wow. Most admirably. I say a night's work, but an hour's would be nearer the mark. I simply want your opinion about a hydraulic stamping machine which has got out of gear. If you show us what is wrong, we shall soon set it right ourselves. What do you think of such a commission as that? Well, the work appears to be light and the pay maleficent. Precisely so. We shall want you to come tonight by the last train. Where to? To Iresford, in Berkshire. There's a little place near the borders of Oxfordshire, within 7 miles of Reading. There is a train from Paddington which would bring you there about 11:15. Very good. I shall come down in a carriage to meet you. There is a drive, then? Yes, our little place is quite out of the country. It is a good 7 miles from Ayford Station. Then we can hardly get there before midnight. I suppose there would be no chance of a train back. I should be compelled to stop for the night. Yes, you could easily give you a shakedown. That is very awkward. Could I not come down some more convenient hour? We have judged it best that you should come late. It is to recompense you for any inconvenience that we are paying you, a young and unknown man. A fee which would buy the opinion of the very heads of your profession. Still, of course, if you would like to draw out of business, there is plenty of time to do so. I thought of the 50 guineas and of how very useful they would be to me. Not at all, said I. I shall be very happy to accommodate myself to your wishes. I should like, however, to understand a little more clearly what it is that you wish me to do. Quite so. This is natural that the pledge of secrecy which would be exacted from you should have aroused your curiosity. I have no wish to commit you to anything without your having it laid before you. I suppose that we are absolutely safe from eavesdroppers? Entirely. Then the matter stands thus. You are probably aware that fuller earth is a valuable product, and that it is only found in 1 or 2 places of England. I've heard so. Some little time ago I bought a small place, a very small place, within 10 miles of Reading. I was fortunate enough to discover that there is a deposit of fuller's earth in one of my fields. On examining it, however, I found that the deposit is a comparatively small one, and that it has formed a link of 2 very much larger ones upon the right and left, both of them, however, than the grounds of my neighbors. These good people were absolutely ignorant to the fact their land concluded such, which was quite as valuable as a gold mine. Naturally, it is my interest to buy their land before they discovered its true value, but unfortunately I had no capital by which to do this. I took a few of my friends into the secret, however, and they suggested that we should quietly and secretly work on our own little deposit, and that in this way we could earn money which would enable us to buy the neighboring fields. This we have now been doing for some time, and in order to help us with our operations, we erected a hydraulic press. This press, as I have already explained, has got out of order, and wish your advice upon the subject. We guard our secret very jealously, however, and if it once became known that we had hydraulic engineers coming to our little house, it would soon rouse inquiry, and then, if the fact came out, it would be goodbye to any chance of getting these fields and carrying out our plans. That is why I have made you promise that you would not tell a human being that you are going to Eiford tonight. I hope that I make it all plain. I quite follow you, said I. The only point I could not quite understand is what use you could make of a hydraulic press in excavating fuller's earth, which, as I understand, is dug out of like gravel from a pit. Ah, he said carelessly. We have our own process. We compress the earth into bricks as to remove them without revealing what they are. And there is a mere detail. I have taken you fully into my confidence now, Mr. Hatherley, and I have shown you now I trust you. He rose as he spoke. I shall expect you then at Eiford at 11:15. I shall certainly be there. And not a word to a soul. He looked at me with the last long questioning gaze, and then pressing my hand in a cold, dank grasp, he hurried from the room. Well, when I came to think it over in the cold blood, I was very much astonished, as you both may think, at the sudden commission which I had been entrusted. And on the one hand, of course, I was glad, for the fee was at least tenfold what I should have asked had I set upon the priest of my own services, and it was possible that this order might lead to other ones. On the other hand, the face and manner of my patron made an unpleasant impression on me, and I could not think that his explanation of the fuller's earth was sufficient to explain the necessity for my coming at midnight, and his extreme anxiety lest I should tell anyone of my errand. However, I threw all fears to the winds, ate a hearty supper, and drove to Paddington, and started off, having obeyed to the letter the injunction as my holding my tongue. At Reading, I had to change not only my carriage, but my station. However, I was in time for the last train to Eiford, and I reached the little dim-lit station after 11 o'clock. I was the only passenger who got out there, and there was no one upon the platform save a single sleepy porter with a lantern. As I passed out through the wicket gate, however, I found my acquaintance on the morning waiting in the shadow upon the other side. Without a word, he grasped my arm and hurried me into a carriage, the door of which was standing open. It drew up the windows on either side, tapped the woodwork, and away we went as fast as the horse could go. One horse, interjected Holmes. Yes, only one. Did you observe its color? Yes, I saw it by the sidelights when I was stepping into the carriage. It was a chestnut. Oh, fresh and glossy. Thank you. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. Pray continue your most interesting statement. Away we went, and we drove for at least an hour. Colonel Lysander Stark had said it was only 7 miles, but I should think from the rate that we seemed to go, that from the time it took, that was probably more near 12. He sat on my side in silence all the time, and I was aware, more than once when I glanced in his direction, he was looking at me with great intensity. The country roads seemed to not be very good in that part of the world, for we lurched and jolted terribly. I tried to look out the windows to see something of where we were, but they were made of frosted glass, and I could not make out nothing save the occasional bright blur of passing light. Now and then I hazarded some remark to break the monotony of the journey, but the colonel only answered in monosyllables, and the conversation soon flagged. At last, however, the bumping of the road was exchanged by a crisp smoothness of a gravel drive, and the carriage came to a stand. Colonel Lysander Stark sprung out, and I, as I followed after him, pulled me swiftly to the porch which gaped in front of us. We stepped, as it were, right out of the carriage and into the hall, so that I failed to catch the most fleeting glance at the front of the house. The instant that I had crossed the threshold, the door slammed heavily behind us, and I heard a fainting rattle of the wheels of the carriage as it drove away. It was pitch dark inside the house, and the colonel fumbled around looking for matches or muttering something under his breath. Suddenly a door opened on the other end of the passage, and a long golden bar of light shot out in every direction. It grew broader, and a woman appeared with a lamp in her hand, which she held above her head, pushing her face forward and peering at us. I could see that she was pretty, and from the gloss of which the light shone upon her dark dress, I knew that she was a rich material. She spoke a few words in a foreign tongue in a tone all as though asking a question, and when my companion answered in a gruff monosyllable, she gave such a start that the lamp nearly fell from her hand. Colonel Stark went up to her, whispered something in her ear, and then, pushing her back into the room from whence she had come, he walked towards me again with the lamp in his hand. "Perhaps you will have kindness to wait in this room for a few minutes," he said, throwing open another door. It was quiet, little, plainly furnished room, with a round table in the corner, on which several German books were scattered. Colonel Stark laid down the lamp on top of the harmonium beside the door. "I shall keep you waiting an instant," he said, vanished into the darkness. I glanced at the books on the table, and in spite of my ignorance of German, I could see that 2 of them were treatises on science, and the others were volumes of poetry. Then I walked across to the window, hoping that I might catch a glimpse of something of the countryside, but an oak shutter, heavily barred, was folded across it. It was a wonderfully silent house. There was an old clock ticking somewhere in the passage, but otherwise everything was deadly still. A vague feeling of uneasiness began to settle over me. Who were these German people, and what were they doing in this strange place out of the way? And where was this place? It was 10 miles or so from Myford, that was all I knew. But whether north, south, east, or west, I had no idea. For that matter, Reading, and possibly other large towns, were within that radius, so the place might not be so secluded after all. Yet it was quite certain from the absolute stillness that we were in the country. I paced up and down the room, humming a tune under my breath to keep my spirits and my feelings that were thoroughly earning my 50-guinea free. Suddenly, without any preliminary sound, in the midst of the utter stillness, the door of my room swung open slowly. The woman who was standing in the aperture, the darkness of the hall behind her, and the yellow light from my lamp beating upon her eager and beautiful face, I could see at a glance that she was sick with fear, and the sight sent a chill into my own heart. She held up one shaking finger to warn me to be silent, and she shot a few whispered words in broken English at me, her eyes glancing about like a frightened horse into the gloom behind her. "I would go," she said, trying hard, and it seemed to me to speak calmly. "I would go. I should not stay here, but there is no good for you to do." "But, madam," said I have not yet done what I have come for. I cannot possibly leave until I have done seen the machine." "It is not worth your while to wait," she went on. "You can pass through the door. No one hinders." And then, seeing that I smiled and shook my head, she suddenly threw aside her constraint and made a step forward, with her hands wrung together. "For the love of heaven," she whispered, "get away from here before it is too late." But I am somewhat headstrong by nature, and the more ready to engage in an affair there is some obstacle in the way. I thought of my 50-guinea fee for my wearisome journey, and of the unpleasant night which seemed to be before me. Was it all to go north? Why should I slink away without having carried out my commission, and without payment, which was my due? This woman might, for all I knew, be a monomaniac. With a stout bearing, therefore, through her manner of shaking me more than I cared to confess, I still shook my head and declared my intention of remaining where I was. She was about to renew her entreaties when the door slammed overhead, and the sound of several footsteps were heard upon the stairs. She listened for an instant, threw up her hands with a despairing gesture, and vanished as suddenly as noiseless as she had come in. The newcomers were Colonel Lysander Stark and a short, thick man with a chinchilla beard growing out of his creases of his double chin, who was introduced to me as Mr. Ferguson. "This is my secretary and manager," said the colonel. "By the way, I was under the impression that I left his door shut just now. I fear that you have felt a draught." "On the contrary," I said. "I opened the door myself because I felt the room was a little bit close." He shot one of his suspicious looks at me. "Perhaps we had better proceed to business then," said he. "Mr. Ferguson and I will take you up to see the machine." "I had better put on my hat, I suppose." "Oh, no, it is in the house." "Well, you dig fillers in the house?" "Oh, no. This is only where we compress it. But never mind that. All we wish for you to do is examine the machine and let us know what is wrong with it." We went upstairs together, the colonel first with the lamp, the fat manager, and I behind him. It was a labyrinth of an old house with corridors, passages, narrow, winding staircases, and little low doors, thresholds of which were hollowed out by the generations who had crossed them. There were no carpets and no signs of any furniture above the ground floor, while the plaster was peeling off the walls and the damp was breaking through the green, unhealthy blotches. I tried to put on an unconcerned air if possible, but I had forgotten the warnings of the lady, even though I had disregarded them, and I kept a keen eye on my two companions. Ferguson followed to be a more morose and silent man, but I could see from the little that he had that he was at least a fellow countryman. Colonel Lysander Stark stopped at last before the low door, which he unlocked, within a small square room in which the three of us could hardly get in one time. Ferguson remained outside, and the colonel ushered me in. "We are now," he said, "actually within the hydraulic press, and it would be a particularly unpleasant thing for us if anyone to turn it on. The ceiling of this small chamber is really at the end of a descending piston, and it comes down with the force of many tons upon the metal floor. There are small lateral columns of water outside which relieve the force, and transmit the multiplier in the manner which is familiar to you. The machine goes readily enough, but there is some stiffness in the workings of it, and it has lost a little of its force. Perhaps you will have the goodness to look over it and show us how we can set it right." Compression. I took the lamp from him and examined the machine very thoroughly. It was indeed a gigantic one, and capable of exercising enormous pressure. When I paused outside, however, and pressed down the levers which controlled it, I knew at once by the whistling sound that there had been a slight leakage, which allowed the regurgitation of water through one of the side cylinders. An examination showed me that one of the India rubber bands, which was around the head of the driving tool, had shrunk and was not quite to fill the socket as well as it worked. This was clearly the cause of the loss of power, and I pointed out to my companions, who followed my remarks very carefully, and asked several practical questions as to how they should proceed to set it right. When I had made it clear to them, I returned to the main chamber of the machine and took a good look at it to satisfy my own curiosity. It was obvious at a glance that the story of the Four's Earth was a merest fabrication, for it would not be absurd to suppose that an engine so powerful could be designed for an inadequate purpose. The walls were wood, and the floor consisted of a large iron trough, and when it came to examine it, I could see the crust of metallic deposit all over it. I had stooped and was scraping at this to see exactly what I had heard muttered in German, an exclamation in German, and saw the cadaverous face of the colonel looking down at me. "What are you doing down there?" he asked. I felt angry at having been tricked by so elaborate a story that he should have told me. "I was admiring your Four's Earth," said I. "I think that I should be able to advise you on your machine if I knew what exact purpose which was it to be used." The instant that I uttered the words, I regretted the rashfulness of my speech. His face set hard, and a baleful spring lit up in his gray eyes. "Very well," said he. "You shall know all about the machine." I took a sharp step backward and slammed the door, and turned the key in the lock. I rushed towards it and pulled the handle, but it was quite secure, and did not give in the least to my kicks and shoves. "Hello," I yelled. "Hello, Colonel, let me out!" And then suddenly in the silence I heard the sound of which sent my heart into my mouth. It was the clank of the levers and the swish of the leaking cylinder. He had set the engine to work. The lamp which stood upon the floor where I placed it when I was examining the trough, by its light I saw that the black ceiling was coming down upon me, slowly, jerkily, but, as none knew better than myself, with the force which must, within a minute, grind me to a shapeless pulp. I threw myself screaming against the door and dragging my nails at the lock. I implored the colonel to let me out, but the remorseless clanking of the levers drowned out my cries. The ceiling was only a foot or two above my head, and with my hand upraised I could feel its hard, rough surface. Then it flashed through my mind that the pain of my death which would depend on very much on the position in which I met it. If I lay on my face, the weight might come upon my spine. I shuddered to think of the dreadful snap. Easier the other way, perhaps, and yet, had I the nerve to lie down and look up at the deadly black shadow wavering down upon me? Already I was unable to stand erect when my eye caught something of a bit of a gush of hope back into my heart. I have said that the floor and the ceiling were iron. The walls were wood. As I gave a last hurried glance around, I saw a thin line of yellow light between the two of the boards, which broadened and broadened as the small panel was rushed forward. For an instant, I could hardly believe that there was indeed a door which led away from death. The next instant, I threw myself through, and lay half fainting upon the other side. The panel had closed again behind me, and the crash of the lamp, and a few moments afterwards the clang of the two metal slabs together, told me how narrow had been my escape. I was recalling to myself the frantic plucking of my wrist, and I found myself lying upon the stone floor of a narrow corridor, while the woman bent over me tugged at me with her left hand, while she was able to hold a candle in her right. It was the same good friend whose warning I had foolishly rejected. "Come, come," she said breathlessly. "They will be here in a minute. They will see that you are not there, and do not waste so precious a time, but come." This time, at least, I had no scorn for her advice. I staggered to my feet and ran with her along the corridor and down a winding stair. The latter led me a broad passage, and just as we reached it, we heard the sound of the running feet and the shouting of two voices, one answering the other from the other floor we had just been on, and the other coming up from beneath. My guide stopped and looked at her like one who was at her wit's end. Then she threw open a door which led into a bedroom, through the window of which the moon was shining brightly. "It is your only chance," she said. "It is high, but it may be that you can jump out of it." As she spoke, a light sprang into view at the other end of the passage, and then I saw the lean figure of Colonel Sander Stark rushing forward with a lantern in one hand, and a weapon like a butcher's cleaver in the other. I rushed across the bedroom, flung open the window, and looked out. How quiet and sweet and wholesome was the garden looked between the moonlight. And it could not be more than 30 feet down. I clambered out on the sill, but hesitated to jump until I should have heard what passed between my savior and the ruffian who pursued me. If she were ill-used, then at risks, I determined to go back to her assistance. And though the thought had hardly flashed through my mind before he was at the door, pushing his way past her, but she threw her arms around him and tried to hold him back. "Fritz, Fritz," she cried in English, "remember your promise after the last time. You said it should not be again. He will be silent. Oh, he will be silent." "You're mad, at least," he shouted, struggling to break away from her. "You will be the ruin of us. He has seen too much. Let me pass, I say." He dashed her to one side and, rushing to the window, cut at me with his heavy weapon. I had let go of myself, and hanging by the hands of the sill, when his blow fell. I was conscious of the dull pain. My grip loosened, and I fell to the garden below. I was shaken, but not hurt by the fall, so I picked myself up and rushed along the bushes as hard as I could run, for I understood that I was far from being out of danger. Suddenly, however, as I ran, a deadly dizziness and sickness came over me. I glanced down at my hand, which was throbbing painfully, but then, for the first time, I saw that my thumb had been cut off, and that the blood was pouring out of my wound. I endeavored to tie the handkerchief around it, but there came a sudden buzzing in my ears, and the next moment I fell in a dead faint among the rose bushes. How long I remained unconscious I cannot tell. It must have been a very long time, for the moon had sunk and a bright morning was breaking when I came to myself. My clothes were all sodden with dew, and my coat sleeve was drenched with blood from my wounded thumb. A smarting of it recalled in an instant the particulars of the night's adventure, and I sprang from my feet with a feeling that I might hardly yet be safe from my pursuers. But to my astonishment, when I came to and looked around me, neither house nor garden were to be seen. I had been lying on the angle of a hedge close to the high road, and just a little lower down was a long building, which proved, upon my approaching it, to be the very station at which I had arrived upon the previous night. Yeah, I'll hydrate. If I get my bottle open. Were it not for the ugly wound upon my hand, all that had passed during those dreadful hours might have been an evil dream. Half dazed, I went to the station and asked about the morning train. There would be one in Reading in less than an hour. The same porter was on duty, I found, as I had been there when I arrived. I inquired of him whether he had ever heard of Colonel Lysander Stark. The name was strange to him. He had reserved a carriage that night before waiting for me. No, he had not. There was a police station anywhere near. There was one about 3 miles off. It was too far for me to go, weak and ill as I was. I was determined to wait until I had got back to town before telling my story to the police. It was a little past 6 when I arrived, so I first went to the wound dressed, and then went to the doctor, who was kind enough to bring me here along. I put the case into your hands and shall do exactly what you advise. We both sat in silence for a little time, listening to the extraordinary narrative. Then Sherlock Holmes pulled down from one of the shelf of ponderous commonplace books in which he had placed his cuttings. Here is an advertisement which will interest you, he said. It appeared on the papers about a year ago. Listen to this. Lost on the 9th. Instruction. Mr. Jeremiah Haling, aged 26, a hydraulic engineer, left his lodgings at 10 o'clock at night and has not been heard of since. He was dressed in, etc., etc. Ha! That represents the time of the colonel needed to have his machine overhauled, I fancy. Good heavens, cried my patient. Then that explains what the girl said. Undoubtedly. It is quite clear that the colonel was a cool and desperate man who was absolutely determined that nothing should stand in the way of his little game. Like those out-and-out pirates who will leave no survivor from a captured ship. Well, every moment now is precious. If you feel equal to it, we shall go to Scotland Yard at once as a preliminary to starting for effort. Some 3 hours afterwards, we were all at the train together, bounding to Reading to go to the little Berkshire village. There was Sherlock Holmes, the hydraulic engineer, Inspector Broadstreet of Scotland Yard, a plainclothes man, and myself. Broadstreet had spread the Ordnance map on the country on which his seat, and was very busy with his compasses drawing circles from Iford to its centre. There you are, said he. That circle is drawn at the radius of 10 miles from the village. The place we want must be somewhere within that line. You said 10 miles, I think, sir. It was an hour's drive. And you think that they brought you back that way when you were unconscious? They must have done so. I have a confused memory, too, of having been lifted and conveyed somewhere. What I cannot understand, I said, is why they should have spared you when they found you lying fainting in the garden. Perhaps the villain was softened by the woman's entreaties. I hardly think that was it, likely. I never saw that inexorable face in my life. Oh, well, we should soon find that out, said Bradstreet. Well, I've drawn my circle, and I only wish I knew at what point it was the folks that we search for found. I think I could lay my finger on it, said Holmes quietly. Really now, said the inspector. You have formed your opinion. Come now, we shall see who agrees with it. I say it is south, for the country is more deserted there. I say it was east, said my patient. I am for the west, remarked the plainclothes man. There are several quiet little villages up there. And I'm for the north, said I, because there are no hills there, and our carriage says they did not notice the carriage go up any way. Come, cried the inspector, laughing, it's a very pretty diversity of opinion. We have balked the compass among us. What do you give your casting vote to? You're all wrong. But we can't all be. Oh, yes, you can. That is my point. I placed a finger in the center of the circle. This is where we shall find them. But the 12-mile drive, gasped Heatherly. 6 out and 6 back. Nothing simpler. You say yourself that the horse was fresh and glossy when you got in. How could it be that it had gone 12 miles over heavy roads? Indeed, it is a likely enough ruse, said Bradstreet thoughtfully. Of course, there can be no doubt as to the nature of this gang. Not at all, said Holmes. They are corners on a large scale, and have used this machine to form an amalgam which has taken the place of silver. We have known for some time that a Cleaver gang was at work, said the inspector. They have been turning out half-crowns by the thousand. We even traced them as far as Reading, but could get no further, for they had covered the traces in a way that showed that they were very old hands. But now, thanks to this lucky chance, I think that we've got them right enough. But the inspector was mistaken, for those criminals were not destined to fall into the hands of justice. As we rolled into Eyford Station, we saw a gigantic column of smoke which steamed up from behind a small clump of trees in a neighborhood and hung like an immense ostrich feather in the landscape. A house on fire? Asked Bradstreet as the train steamed off again. Yes, sir. When did it break out? I hear that it was during the night, but it has got worse. The whole place is ablaze. Which house is it? Dr. Betch's. Tell me, broke the engineer, is Dr. Beecher a German man, very thin, with a long, sharp nose? The station manager left early. No, sir, Dr. Beecher is an Englishman, and there isn't a man in the parish who has better lined waistcoat. He has a gentleman staying with him, a patient, as I understand, who is a foreigner, and he looks very good, like Berkshire beef would do him no harm. The station master had not finished his speech before we were all hastening in the direction of the fire. The road topped a low hill, and there was a widespread whitewashed building in front of us, spouting fire as every chink and window, while the garden in front had 3 fire engines that were vainly striving to keep the flames under. That's it, cried Hatherley, in intense excitement. There's the gravel road, and there's the rose bushes where I laid. The second window is the one I jumped from. Well, at least, said Holmes, you have your revenge upon them. There can be no question that it was your oil lamp in which was crushed in the press that set fire to the wood walls, though no doubt they were excited in the chase after you to observe that time. Now keep your eyes open in the crowd for your friends from last night, though I very much fear that they are 100 miles away from now. And Holmes' fears came to be realized. From what's that day there were no less heard either the woman, the sinister German, or the morose Englishman. Early that morning, a peasant had met a cart containing several people and some rather bulky boxes, driving rapidly in the direction of Reading. But there were all traces of the fugitives disappeared, and even Holmes' ingenuity failed to discover at least one clue to their whereabouts. The firemen had been much perturbed at the strange arrangements which they had found within, and still more so by discovering a newly severed human thumb upon a windowsill on the second floor. About sunset, however, their efforts were at last successful, and they subdued the flames, but were not beyond before the roof had fallen in. The whole place had been reduced to an absolute ruin. Save for some twisted cylinders and iron piping, not a trace remained of the machinery that had cost our unfortunate acquaintance so dearly. Large masses of nickel and of tin were discovered stored in an outhouse, but no coins were to be found, which may have explained the presence of those bulky boxes which had already been referred to. Our hydraulic engineer had been conveyed from the garden to the spot where he recovered his senses, and had remained forever a mystery, were it not for a soft mould which told us of a very plain tale. He had evidently been carried down by two persons, one of whom had remarkably small feet, and the other unusually large ones. On the whole, it was most probable that the silent Englishman, being less bold and less murderous than his companion, had assisted the woman to bear the unconscious man out of the way of danger. "Well," said our engineer ruefully, as we took our seats to return once more to London, "it has been a pretty business for me. I've lost my thumb and have lost 50 guinea fee, and what have I gained?" "Experience," said Holmes, laughing, "and directly it may be of value to you. But you only have to put it into words to gain reputation of being excellent company for the remainder of your existence." Yeah, that was fun. Using a hydraulic press to imitate silver for coinage. Nickel and tin. Yeah, I guess that would combine relatively safe enough to make it look like silver. And they only lost the house. And a thumb. Stretching in a moment. Let's see. What's this next one? Next one is 25 pages. Not too bad. It's really fun trying to read an entire story in a Cockney accent. Oh well. Drink real quick. Excuse me. The next story: The Adventure of the Noble Bachelor. The Lord St. Simon marriage and its curious termination have long ceased to be the subject of interest in those exalted circles in which the unfortunate bridegroom moves. Fresh scandals have eclipsed it, and their more piquant details have drawn the gossips away from this 4-year-old drama. As I have reason to believe, however, that the full facts have never been revealed to the general public, and as my friend Sherlock Holmes had a considerable share in clearing the matter up, I feel that no memoir of him would be complete without some little sketch of this remarkable episode. It was a few weeks before my own marriage, during the days which I was still sharing rooms with Holmes in Baker Street, that he came home from an afternoon stroll to find a letter on the table waiting for him. I'd remained indoors all day, for the weather had taken a sudden turn to rain, with the high autumnal winds, and the Jezebel bullet, which I brought back in one of my limbs, as a relic of my Afghan campaign, throbbed with a dull persistency. With my body in one easy chair, and my legs upon the other, I surrounded myself with a cloud of newspapers until at last, saturated with the news of the day, I tossed them all aside and lay listless, watching the huge crest and monogram upon the envelope before the table, and wondering lazily who my friend's noble correspondent could be. "Here's a very fashionable epistle," I remarked as he entered. "Your morning letters, if I remember right, were from a fishmonger and a tide waiter." "Yes, my correspondence is certainly the charm of variety," he answered, smiling. "And the humbler are usually more interesting. This one looks like one of those unwelcome social summonses which call upon a man either to be bored or to lie." He broke the seal and glanced over the contents. "Oh, come, it may prove to be something of interest, after all." "Not social, then?" "No, distinctly professional. And from a noble client of the highest in England." "My dear fellow, I congratulate you." "I assure you, Watson, without affection, that the state of my client in this matter is of less moment to me than the interest of this cause. It is just possible, however, that may also be wanting in this new investigation. You have been reading the papers diligently of late, have you not?" "It looks like it," I said ruefully, pointing to the huge bundle in the corner. "I have had nothing else to do." "It is fortunate for you that you will perhaps be post me up. I read nothing except the criminal news in the agony column. The latter is always instructive, but if you have followed recent events so closely, you must have read about Lord St. Simon and his wedding." "Oh, yes, with the deepest interest." "That is well. The letter which I hold in my hand is from Lord St. Simon. I will read it to you, and in return you must turn over those papers and let me have whatever bears upon the matter. This is what he says. My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Lord Blackwater tells me that I may place implicit reliance upon your judgment and discretion. I have determined, therefore, to call upon you and to consult you in the reference of a very painful event which has occurred in connection to my wedding. Mr. Lestrade, of Scotland Yard, is acting already in the matter, but he assures me that he sees no objection to your cooperation, and that he even thinks that it might be of some assistance. I will call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and should you have any other engagements at the time, I shall hope that you will postpone it, as this is a matter of paramount importance. Yours faithfully, St. Simon." Hey, Fred. It is dated from Gersner Mansions, written with a quill pen, and the noble lord has had the misfortune to get a smear of ink upon the outer side of his right little finger, remarked Holmes, as he folded up the pistol. "It says 4 o'clock. It is 3 now. You will be here in an hour." "Then I have just time, with your assistance, to get clear on the subject. Turn over those papers and arrange the extracts in the order of time, while I take a glance at who our client is." He picked a red-covered letter volume from the line of books of reference upon the mantelpiece. "Here he is," he said, sitting down and flattening it upon the knee. "Lord Robert Walsingham de Vere St. Simon, second son of the Duke of Balmoral. Arms, azure, 3 calops, and chief over fresh stables. Born in 1846, he is 41 years of age, which is mature for a marriage. Was Undersecretary for the Colonies in the late administration. The Duke, his father, was at one time Secretary of Foreign Affairs. They inherit Plantagenet blood by direct descent and Tudor on the distaff side. Ha! Well, there's nothing very instructive here of all this. I think I must turn to you, Watson, for something more solid. Ancient. I have very little difficulty in finding what I want, said I, for the facts are quite recent, and the matter struck me as remarkable. I feared to refer you to them, however, as I knew that you had an injury on your hand, and you disliked the intrusion of the matters. Oh, you mean the little problem of Grosvenor Square furniture van? That is quite cleared up now, although, indeed, it wasn't obvious from the first. Pray give me the results of your newspaper selections. 3 years old. Here's the first notice which I can find. It is in the personal column of the Morning Post, and dates, as you see, some weeks back. I can't get over 30 being old. A marriage has been arranged, it says, and will, if rumour is correct, very shortly take place between Lord Robert St. Simon, second son of the Duke of Balmoral, to Miss Hattie Doran, the only daughter of Ulysses Doran, Esquire, of San Francisco, California, USA. That is all. Terse and to the point, remarked Holmes, stretching his long, thin legs towards the fire. There was a paragraph amplifying this one on the society papers of the same week. Ah, here it is. There will soon be a call for protection in the marriage market, for the present free trade principle appears to tell heavily against our home product. One by one, the management of the noble houses of Great Britain is passing into the hands of our fair cousins from across the Atlantic. The important addition has been made during the last week in the list of the prizes which have been borne away by these charming invaders. Lord St. Simon, who has shown himself for even 20 years proof against this little god's arrows, has now definitely announced his approaching marriage to Miss Hattie Doran, the fascinating daughter of a California millionaire. Miss Doran, whose graceful figure and striking face attracted much attention at the Westbury House festivities, is an only child, and it is currently reported that her dowry will run considerably over the 6 figures, with expectancies for the future. As it is an open secret that the Duke of Balmoral has been compelled to sell his pictures within the last few years, and as Lord St. Simon has no property of his own save a small estate in Birchmoor, it is obvious that the Californian heiress is not only the gainer by an allowance, which will enrapture her to make her an easy and common transition from a Republican lady to a British peeress. Anything else? Asked Holmes, yawning. Oh, yes, plenty. Then there is another note in the Morning Post to say that the marriage would be an absolutely quiet one, that it would be at St. George, Hanover Square, and that only half a dozen intimate friends would be invited, and that the party would return to the furnished house at Lancaster Gate, which has been taken by Miss Alonzo Doran. 2 days later, that is, on Wednesday night, there is a curt announcement that the wedding had taken place, and that the honeymoon would be passed at Lord Blackwater's place, near Pesterfield. Those are all the notices which appeared before the disappearance of the bride. Before the what? Asked Holmes with a start. The vanishing of the lady. When did she vanish, then? At the wedding breakfast. Indeed. This is more interesting than promised to me. Quite dramatic, in fact. Yes, it has struck me as being a little out of the common. They often vanish before the ceremony, and occasionally during the honeymoon, but I cannot call to mind anything that so prompt as this. Pray, let me have the details. I warn you, they are very incomplete. Perhaps we may make them less so. Such as they are set forth in a single article of the morning paper of yesterday, which I will read to you. It is headed, Singular Occurrence, at a fashionable wedding. The family of Lord Robert St. Simon has been thrown into the greatest consternation by the strange and painful episodes which have taken place in connection with his wedding. The ceremony, as shortly announced in the papers of yesterday, occurred in the previous morning. But it is only now that it has been possible to confirm the strange rumors which have been made so persistently floating about. In spite of the attempts of the friends to hush the matter up, so much public attention has now been drawn to it that no good purpose can be served by affecting this to disregard what is a common subject of conversation. The ceremony, which was performed at St. George's, Hanover Square, was a very quiet one, no one being present save for the father of the bride, Mr. Alonzus Doran, the Duchess of Balmoral, Lord Backwater, Lord Instance, and Lady Clara St. Simon, the younger brother and sister of the bridegroom, and Lady Alicia Wissington. The whole party proceeded afterwards to the house of Mr. Alonzus Doran at Lancaster Gate, where breakfast had been prepared. It appears that there was some little trouble caused by a woman, whose name has not been ascertained, who endeavoured to force her way into the house upon the bridal party, alleging that she had some claim upon Lord St. Simon. It was only after a painful and prolonged scene that she was ejected by the butler and the footman. The bride, who had fortunately entered the house before the unpleasant interruption, had sat down to breakfast with the rest, when she complained of a sudden indigestion and retired upon her room. Her prolonged absence having caused some comment, her father followed her, but learned from her maid that she had only come up to her chamber for an instant, caught up in an ulster and bonnet, and hurried down the passage. One of the footmen declared that he had seen the lady leave the house, thus appealed, but had refused to comment at his mistress, believing her to be with the company. On ascertaining that his daughter had disappeared, Mr. Alonzus Doran, in conjunction with the bridegroom, instantly put themselves in communication with the police, and very energetic inquiries were being made, which will probably result in a speedy clearing up of this very singular business. Up to the late hour last night, however, nothing had transpired as to the whereabouts of the missing lady. There are rumors of foul play in the matter, and it is said that the police have caused the arrest of a woman who had caused the original disturbance, and believe that, from jealousy or some other motive, she may have been concerned in the strange disappearance of the bride. Is that all? Only one little item in another of the morning papers, but a suggestive one. And it is? Miss Flora Miller, the lady who has caused the disturbance, was actually been arrested. It appears that she was formerly a dueña of the Allegro, and that she was known to the bridegroom for some years. There are no further particulars, and the whole case is in your hands now, so far as it seems to set forth in the public press. An exceedingly interesting case, it appears to be. I would not be misled by the words. But there's a ring at the bell, Watson, and as the clock makes it a few minutes before 4, I have no doubt that this will prove to be our noble client. Do not dream of going, Watson, for I very much prefer having witnesses, if only as to check on our own memory. Lord Robert St. Simon, announced our page boy, throwing open the door. A gentleman entered with a pleasant, cultured face, high-nosed and pale, with something, perhaps, of petulance about the mouth, and with a steady, well-opened eye of a man whose present lot it had ever been to command or to be obeyed. The manner was brisk, and yet his general appearance gave an undue impression of age, for he had a slight forward stoop and a little bend at his knees as he walked. His hair, too, as he swept off the very curly-brimmed hat, was grizzled round the edges and thin upon the top. As to his dress, it was careful to the verge of foppishness, with a high collar, black frock coat, white waistcoat, yellow gloves, patent leather shoes, and light-coloured gaiters. He advanced slowly into the room, turning his head left to right, and swinging his right hand to the cord in which he held his golden glasses. "Good day, Lord St. Simon," said Holmes, rising and bowing. Pray, take a basket chair. This is my friend and colleague Dr. Watson. And draw up a little of the fire, and we will talk of this matter over. A most painful matter to me. You can most readily imagine, Mr. Holmes. I have been cut to the quick. I understand that you have already managed several delicate cases of this sort, sir, though I presume they are not hardly of the same classes of society. No, I'm descending. I beg your pardon? My last client was the sort of a king. Oh, really? I had no idea. And which king? The king of Scandinavia. What? Had he lost his wife? You can understand, said Holmes suavely, that I extend to the affairs of my other clients the same secrecy which I promised to yours. Oh, of course. Right. I'm sure I beg your pardon. As to my own case, I'm ready to give you any information which may assist you in forming an opinion. Thank you. I've already learned all that is in the public prints, nothing more. I presume that I may take it correct this article, for example, that you happen to be the disappearance of a bride? Lieutenant Salmon glanced over it. Yes, that is correct as far as it goes. But it needs a great deal of supplementing before anyone could offer an opinion. I think that I may arrive to my facts most directly by questioning you. Pray do so. When did you first meet Miss Hattie Dorn? In San Francisco a few years ago. You were traveling in the States? Yes. Did you become engaged then? No. But you were on a friendly footing? I was amused by her society, and she could see that I was amused by it. Her father is very rich. He is said to be the richest man on the Pacific Slope. And how did he make his money? In mining. He had nothing a few years ago, and then he struck gold, invested it, and came by leaps and bounds. Now, what is your own impression as to the young lady, your wife's character? The nobleman swung his glasses a little faster and stared down into the fire. You see, Mr. Holmes, said he, my wife was 20 before her father became a rich man. During that time, she ran free in a mining camp and wandered through the woods or mountains, so that her education was come from nature rather than the schoolmaster. She is what we call in England a tomboy, with a strong nature, wild and free, unfettered by any sort of traditions. She is impetuous, volcanic. I was about to say, she is swift in making up her mind and fearless in carrying out her resolutions. On the other hand, I would not have given her the name which I have the honor to bear. He gave a little stately cough. Had not I thought her to be at the bottom a noble woman. I believe that she is capable of heroic self-sacrifice, and that anything dishonorable would repugnate her. Real wild woman. Actual tomboy. Have you a photograph? I brought this with me. He opened the locket and showed us the full face of a very lovely woman. It was not a photograph, but an ivory miniature, and the artist had brought out the full effect of the lustrous black hair, large dark eyes, and exquisite mouth. Holmes gazed long and earnestly at it. Then he closed the locket and handed it back to the Lord St. Simon. The lady came back to London, then, and you renewed your acquaintance? Yes, her father brought her over for his last London season. I met her several times and engaged to her, and have now married her. She brought, I understand, a considerable dowry. A fair dowry, not more than is usual in my family. And this, of course, remains to you, since the marriage is a fait accompli. I really have made no inquiries on the subject. No, naturally not. Did you see Miss Doran on the day before the wedding? Yes. Was she in good spirits? Never met her. She kept talking of what we should do with our future lives. Indeed, that is very interesting. And on the morning of the wedding? She was as bright as possible, at least until after the ceremony. Did you observe any change in her then? Oh, to tell the truth, I saw the first signs that I'd ever seen that her temper was just a little sharp. The incident, however, was too trivial to relate and can have no possible bearing upon the case. Pray, let us have it, for all that. Oh, it's childish. She dropped the bouquet as we went towards the vestry. She was passing a pew at the time, and it fell over into a pew. Then there was a moment's delay, but the gentleman in the pew handed it up to her again, and it did not appear to be worse for the fall. Yet when I spoke to her of the matter, she answered me abruptly, and in the carriage on our way home she seemed absurdly agitated at the trifling cause. Indeed. You say that there was a gentleman in the pew. Some of the general public was present then? Oh, yes, it was impossible to exclude them from the churches open. This gentleman was not one of your wife's friends. Oh, no. I call him a gentleman by courtesy, but he was quite a common-looking person. I hardly noticed his appearance, but really, I think that we are wandering rather far from the point. Lady St. Simon, then, returned from the wedding in a less cheerful frame of mind than she had gone to it. What did she do on re-entering her father's house? I saw her in a conversation with her maid. And who is the maid? Alice is her name. She's an American and came from California with her. A confidential servant. A little too much so. It seemed to me that her mistress allowed her to take great liberties. So, of course, in America they look upon these things in a different way. How long did she speak to this Alice? Oh, a few minutes. I had something else to think of. You did not overhear what she said. Lady St. Simon said something about jumping a claim. She was accustomed to use a slang of this kind. I have no idea what she meant. American slang is very expressive sometimes. And what did your wife do when she finished speaking to her maid? She walked into the breakfast room. On your arm? No, alone. She is very independent in little matters like that. Then after we sat down for 10 minutes or so, she rose hurriedly, muttered some words of apology, and left the room. She never came back. But this maid, Alice, as I understand, deposes that she went to her room, covered her bride's dress with a long ulster, put on a bonnet, and went out? Quite so. She was afterwards seen walking into Hyde Park in the company of Flora Miller, a woman who's now in custody, and who has already made a disturbance at Mr. Doran's house that morning. Ah, yes. I should like a few particulars to this young lady, and your relations to her. Lord Simon shrugged his shoulders and raised his eyebrows. We've been on a friendly footing for some years. I may say on very friendly footing. She used to be at the Allegro, and I have treated her not ungenerously. And she has no just cause to complain against me, but you know what women are, Mr. Holmes. Flora was a dear little thing, and exceedingly high-headed, but devotedly attached to me. She wrote me dreadful letters when she heard that I was about to be married, and to tell the truth, the reason why I had the marriage celebrated so quietly was that I feared lest there might be a scandal with the church. She came to Mr. Doran's door just as after we had returned, and she endeavored to push her way in, utterly very abusive expressions towards my wife, and even threatening her. But I had foreseen the possibility of something of the sort, and I had 2 policemen follow her their private clothes, who soon pushed her out again. She was quiet when she saw the theory was no good in making a row. Did your wife hear all this? No, thank goodness she did not. And she was seen walking with this very woman afterwards? Yes, that's what Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard looks upon so seriously. This was before that decoyed my wife out and laid some terrible trap for her. Well, it is a possible supposition. You think so too? I did not say a probable one, but you did not yourself look upon this as likely. I do not think Flora would hurt a fly. He doesn't know women. Still, jealousy is a strange transformer of characters. Pray, what is your own theory as to what took place? Oh, really, I came to seek a theory, not to propound one. I've given you all the facts since you asked me. However, I may say that it has occurred to me as possible that the excitement of this affair, the consciousness that she has made so immense a social stride, and the effect of causing some little nervous disturbance in my wife. In short, that she had become suddenly deranged. Well, really, when I consider that she has turned her back, I will not say upon me, but upon so much that may have aspired without recent success, I can hardly explain it in any other fashion. Well, certainly that is also a conceivable hypothesis, said Holmes, smiling. And now, Lord St. Simon, I think that I have nearly all my data. May I ask whether you are seated at the bedside table so that you can see out the window? We can see the other side of the road at the park. Quite so. Then I do not think that I need to detain you longer. I shall communicate with you. Should you be fortunate enough to solve the problem, said our client, rising. Oh, I have solved it. Eh? What was that? I say that I have solved it. Where, then, is my wife? That is a detail which I shall speedily supply. Lord St. Simon shook his head. I'm afraid that it will take wiser heads than yours or mine, he remarked. And bowing in a stately, old-fashioned manner, he departed. It is very good of Lord St. Simon to honor our head by putting it on a level with his own, said Sherlock Holmes, laughing. I think that I shall have a whiskey and soda and a cigar after this cross-questioning. I have formed my conclusions as to this case before our client came into the room. My dear Holmes, I have notes of several similar cases, though none, as I remarked before, were quite as prompt. My whole examination served to turn the conjecture into a certainty. Circumstantial evidence is occasionally very convincing, as when you find a trout in the milk, to quote Thoreau's example. But I have heard all that you have heard. Without, however, the knowledge of pre-existing cases which serves me so well. There is a parallel instance in Aberdeen some years back, and something on very much the same lines as Munich the year after the Franco-Prussian War. It was like one of these cases, but hello, there's Lestrade. Good afternoon, Lestrade. You will find an extra tumbler on the sideboard, and there are cigars in the box. The official detective was attired in a pea jacket and cravat, which gave him a decidedly nautical appearance, and he carried a black canvas bag in his hand. With a short greeting, he seated himself and lit a cigar which had been offered to him. What's up, then? Asked Holmes with a twinkle in his eye. You look dissatisfied. I feel dissatisfied. This is infernal St. Simon marriage case. I can make neither head nor tail of the business. Really, you surprise me. Who ever heard of such a mixed affair? Every clue seems to slip through my fingers, and I've been at work upon it all day. And very wet it seems to have made you, said Holmes, laying his hand upon the arm of Pt5. Yes, I've been dragging the serpentine. For heaven's name, what for? In search of the body of Lady St. Simon. Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his chair and laughed heartily. Have you dragged the basin of Trafalgar Square and Mountain? He said. Why, what do you mean? Because you have just as good a chance of finding the lady there as in one or the other. Lestrade shot an angry glance at my companion. I suppose you know all about it, then? He snarled. Well, I have only just heard the facts, but my mind is made up. Oh, indeed. Then you think that the serpentine plays no part in the matter? I think it very unlikely. Then perhaps you will kindly explain how it is that we found this, then. He opened his bag as he spoke, and out tumbled to the floor a wedding dress of watered silk, a pair of white satin shoes, and a bride's wreath and veil, all discolored and soaked in water. There, he said, putting a new wedding ring upon the top of the pile. There's a little nut for you to crack, Mr. Holmes. Oh, indeed, said my friend, blowing blue rings into the air. You dragged them from the serpentine? No, we found them floating near the margin of the park keeper. They have been identified as her clothes, and it seemed to me that if the clothes were there, then the body would not be far off. By the same brilliant reasoning, every man's body is to be found in the neighborhood of his wardrobe. And pray, did you hope to arrive at this, though? Some evidence implicating Flora Miller in the disappearance. I'm afraid that you will find it difficult. Are you indeed now? Cried Lestrade with some bitterness. I'm afraid, Holmes, that you are not very practical with your deductions and your inferences. You have made 2 blunders in as many minutes. This dress does implicate Miss Flora Miller. And how? And the dress is a pocket, and the pocket is a card case, and the card case is a note, and here's the very note. He slapped it down upon the table in front of him. Listen to this. You will see me when all is ready. Come at once. FHM. Now, my theory all along has been that Lady St. Simon was decoyed away by Miss Flora Miller, and that she, with confederates, no doubt, was responsible for the disappearance. Here, signed with her own initials, is the very note which was no doubt slipped into the hand of the door which lured her within the reach. Very good, Lestrade, Holmes said, laughing. You really are very fine indeed. Let me see it. He took up the paper in a listless way, but his attention instantly became riveted, and he gave a little cry of satisfaction. This is indeed important, he said. Ha! You find it so? Extremely so. I congratulate you warmly. Lestrade rose in his triumph and bent his head to look. Why, he shrieked, you're looking at the wrong side. On the contrary, this is the right side. Right side? You're mad. Here's a note with pencil written on it. And over here is what happens to be the fragment of a hotel bill which interests me deeply. There's nothing in it. I looked at it before, said Lestrade. October 4th, rooms 8S, 8 shillings, breakfast 2 shillings, $6, cocktail 1 shilling, lunch 2 shillings, $6, glass sherry, $8. I see nothing in that. Very likely not. It is most important all the same. As to the note, it is also important, or so the initials are. So I congratulate you again. I've wasted enough time, Lestrade said, rising. I believe hard work is not sitting in the fire spinning fine theories. Good day, Mr. Holmes. and we shall see which gets to the bottom of the matter first. He gathered up the garments and thrust them into the bag and made for the door. Just one hint to you, Lestrade, drawled Holmes before his rival vanished. I will tell you the true solution of the matter. Lady St. Simon is a myth. There is not, and there never has been, any such person. Lestrade sadly looked at my companion. Then he turned to me, tapped his forehead 3 times, shook his head solemnly, and hurried away. It hardly shut the door behind him when Holmes put on his overcoat. There's something in what the fellow says about outdoor work, he remarked. So I think, Watson, that I must leave you to your papers for a little. It was after 5 o'clock when Sherlock Holmes left me. But I had no time to be lonely, for within an hour there arrived a confectioner's man with a very large fat box. This he unpacked with the help of the youth whom had brought it with him, and presently, to the very great astonishment, a little Epicurean cold supper began to be laid out on the humble lodging-house mahogany. There were a couple of brace of cold woodcock, a pheasant, a pâté de foie gras, and a group of ancient and cobwebby bottles. Having laid all these out, the luxuries, the 2 visitors vanished away, like the genii of an Arabian Nights, with no explanations, save that things had been paid for and were ordered to this address. Just before 9 o'clock, Sherlock Holmes stepped briskly into the room. His features were gravely set, but there was a light in his eye which made me think that he had not been disappointed in his conclusions. I have laid supper, then, he said, rubbing his hands. You seem to expect company. They have laid out for 5. Yes, I fancy we shall have some company dropping in. I'm surprised that Lord St. Simon has not already arrived. Ha! I fancy that I hear steps now upon the stairs. It was indeed our visitor from the morning who came bustling in, dangling his glasses more vigorously than ever, and with him a very perturbed expression upon his aristocratic features. My messenger reached you, then? Said Holmes. Yes, and I confess that the contents startled me beyond measure. Have you good authority for what you say? The best possible. Lord St. Simon sank into a chair and passed his hand over his forehead. What will the Duke say, he murmured, when he hears that one of the family has been subjected to such humiliation? It is the purest accident. I cannot allow that there is any humiliation. You look like on these things with another understanding point. I fail to see that anyone is to blame. I hardly see how the lady could have acted otherwise, and though her abrupt method of doing so was undoubtedly to be regretted. Having no mother, she had no one to advise her at such crisis. It was a slight, sir, a public slight, said Lord Simon, tapping his fingers on the table. You must make allowance for this poor girl, placed in so unprecedented tension. I'll make no allowance of it. I am very angry indeed, and I have been shamefully used. I think I heard a bell, said Holmes. There are steps on the landing. If I cannot persuade you to take the lenient view of the matter, Lord St. Simon, I have brought an advocate here who may be more successful. He opened the door and ushered a lady and a gentleman. Lord St. Simon, said he, allow me to introduce to you Mr. and Mrs. Francis Hay Moulton. The lady, I think, you have already met. At the sight of the newcomers, our client had sprung from his seat and stood very erect, with his eyes cast down and his hand thrust into the breast of his frock coat, a picture of offended dignity. The lady had taken a quick step forward and had held out her hand to him, but he still refused to raise his eyes. It was as well for his resolution, perhaps, for her pleading face was one which it was hard to resist. "You're angry, Robert," said she. "Oh, I guess you have every cause to be." "Make no apology to me," said Lord St. Simon bitterly. "Oh, yes, I know that I should have treated you real bad, and
that I should have spoken to you before I went, but I was kind of rattled, and from the time that I saw Frank here again, I didn't know what I was doing or saying. I wonder why I didn't fall down and faint right there before the altar. Perhaps, Miss Morgan, you would like my friend and me to leave the room while you explain the matter? If I may give an opinion, remarked the strange gentleman, we've just had a little bit too much secrecy over the business already. For my part, I would like all Europe and America to bear the rights of it. He was a small, wiry, sunburnt, clean-shaven, and a sharp face, and alert manner. And then I'll tell our story right away, said the lady. Frank here and I met in '84 in McGuire's camp near the Rockies, where Pa was working a claim. We were engaged to each other, Frank and I, but then one day Father struck a rich pocket and made a pile. Well, poor Frank here had a claim that petered out and came to nothing. The richer Pa grew, the poorer was Frank, so at last Pa wouldn't hear of our engagement lasting any longer, and he took me away to Frisco. Frank wouldn't throw up his hand, though, and he followed me there, and he saw me without Pa knowing anything about it. Would only have made him mad to know, so we just fixed it all up to ourselves. Frank said that he would go and make his pile too, and never come back to claim me until he had as much as Pa. So then I promised to wait for him till the end of time and pledged myself not to marry anyone else while he lived. Why shouldn't we be married right away, he said, and then I will feel sure of you, and I won't claim to be your husband until I come back. Well, we talked it over, and he fixed it all up so nicely, with the clergyman all ready and waiting, so we just did it right there. Then Frank went off to seek his fortune, and I went back to Pa. The next I heard of Frank was that he was in Montana, that he went prospecting in Arizona, and then I heard of him in New Mexico. After that came a long newspaper story about how a miners' camp had been attacked by Apache Indians, and there was my Frank's name among the killed. I fainted dead away, and I was very sick for months after. Pa thought I had the decline and took me half to the doctors of Frisco. Not a word of news came for a year or more, so that I never doubted that Frank was really dead. Then Lord St. Simon came to Frisco, and we came to London, and a marriage was arranged, and Pa was very pleased. But I felt all the time that no man on earth would ever take the place in my heart that had been given to my poor Frank. Still, if I had married Lord St. Simon, of course, I'd have done my duty by him. We can't command our love, but we can our actions. I went to the altar with him with the intention to make him just as good a wife as it was in me to be. You may imagine what I felt when, as I came to the altar rails, I glanced back and saw Frank standing looking at me out of the first pew. I thought it was his ghost at first, but when I looked again, there he still was, with a kind of question in his eyes, as if to ask me whether I was glad or sorry to see him. I wonder I didn't drop. I know that everything was turning around, and the words of the clergyman were like a buzz in the bee of my ear. I didn't know what to do. Should I stop the service and make a scene in the church? I glanced at him again, and he seemed to know what I was thinking, for he raised a finger to his lips to tell me to be still. Then I saw him scribble on a piece of paper, and I knew that he was writing me a note. As I passed his pew on the way out, I dropped my bouquet next to him, and he slipped me the note in my hand when he returned me the flowers. It was only a line asking me to join him when he made the sign for me to do so. Of course, I never doubted for the moment that my first duty was to him now, and I determined to do whatever he might direct. When I got back, I told my maid, who had known him in California, and had always been his friend, I ordered her to say nothing, but to get a few things packed and my ashlar ready. I know I ought to have spoken to Lord St. Simon, but it was dreadful hard before his mother and all those other great people. I just made up my mind to run away and explain afterwards. I hadn't been at the table 10 minutes before I saw Frank out the window on the other side of the road. He beckoned to me, and I began walking to the park, slipped out my things, and followed him. Some woman came over talking something or other about Lord St. Simon to me, and it seemed to me that the little I had heard he had a little secret of his own before our marriage. But I managed to get away from her and soon overtook Frank. We got into a cab together and drove away from the lodgings he had taken in Gordon Square. And that was my true wedding after all those years of waiting. Frank had been a prisoner among the Apaches, had escaped and come to Frisco, found that I had given him up for dead, and gone to England. He followed me here, and had come upon me at last in the very morning of my second wedding.
I saw the paper, explained the American. It gave me the name of the church, but not where the lady lived.
Then we had to talk as we should do, and Frank was all for openness. But I was so ashamed of it all, and I felt that I should like to vanish and never be seen again from any of them. Just sending a line to my pa, perhaps, to show him that I was alive. It was awful to me to think of all the lords and ladies sitting at the breakfast table waiting for me to come back. So Frank took my wedding clothes and things and made a bundle of them, so that I should not be traced, and dropped them away somewhere where no one could find them. It was likely that we should have gone to the Pirates tomorrow, only that this good gentleman, Mr. Holmes, came round to us this evening. Though how he found us is more than I can think. He showed up very clearly and kindly that was wrong and that Frank was right, and that he should be putting ourselves in the wrong if we were so secret. Then he offered to give some chance of talking to Lord St. Simon alone, so he came right away to his room at once. Now, Robert, you have heard it all, and I'm very sorry I have given you any pain, and I hope that you do not think very meanly of me.
Lord St. Simon had by no means related his rigid attitude. He had listened with a furrowing brow and compressed lips for this long narrative. "Excuse me," he said, "but it is not my custom to discuss my most intimate personal affairs in this public manner."
Then you won't forgive me? You won't shake hands before I go?
"Oh, certainly, if it would give you any pleasure." He put out his hand and coldly grasped that which she extended to him. "I had hoped," suggested Holmes, "that you would have joined us for a friendly supper." "I think that there's little you ask a bit too much," responded his lordship. "I may be forced to acquiesce in these recent developments, but I can hardly be expected to make merry over them. I think that with your permission, I will now wish you all a very good night." He concluded us all in a sweeping bow and stalked out of the room. "Then I trust you will at least honor me with your company," said Sherlock Holmes. "It is always a joy to meet an American, Mr. Moulton, for I am one of those who believe that the folly of a monarch and the blundering of a minister in far-gone years will not prevent our children from being some day citizens of the same world-wide country under a flag which shall be quartering a Union Jack with the stars and stripes." That would be interesting. "The case has been an interesting one," remarked Holmes, when our visitors left us, "because it serves to show very clearly how simple an explanation may be in an affair which at first seems to be almost inexplicable. Nothing could be more natural than the sequence of events as narrated by this lady, and nothing stranger than the result when visited, for instance, by Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard." "You are not yourself at fault, then?" "From the first, two facts were obvious to me. The one, the lady had been quite willing to undergo the wedding ceremony, and the other, that she had repented of it within a few minutes of returning home. Obviously, something had occurred during the morning, then, to cause her to change her mind. What could that something be? She could not have spoken to anyone when she was out, or when she had the company of a bridegroom. Had she seen someone, then? If she had, it must be someone from America, because she had spent so short a time in that country that she could hardly have allowed anyone to acquire so deep an influence over her that the mere sight of him would induce her to change her mind so completely. You see, We have already arrived, by the decision of process of exclusion, at an idea that might have seen an American. Then who could this American be, and why should she possess so much influence over her? It might be a lover. It might be a husband. Her young womanhood had, I knew, been spent through rough scenes and strange conditions, so far as I had got before I had ever heard Lord St. Simon's narrative. When he told us of a man in the pew, of the change in the bride's manner, of so transparent a device of obtaining a note as the dropping of a bouquet, and her resort to her confidential maid, and of her significant allusion to claim-jumping, which in miners' parlance means taking possession of that which another person has prior claim to, the whole situation became absolutely clear. She had gone off with a man, and that man was either a lover or a husband, and chances being in favor of the latter. And how in the world did you find them? It might have been difficult, but friend Lestrade held the information in his hands in the value which he did not know himself. The initials were, of course, of the highest importance, but more valuable still was to know that it was within a week he had settled the bill of one of the most select hotels in London. How did you do so select? By the select prices. 8 shillings for a bed, 8 pence for a glass of sherry, pointed to one of the most expensive hotels. There are not many in London which charge at this rate. In a second one in which I visited Northumberland Avenue, I learned by an inspection of the book that a Francis H. Moulton, an American gentleman, had left only the day before, and on looking at the entries against him, I came upon very items which I had seen in the duplicate bill. His letters were to be forwarded to 226 Gordon Square, so thither I travelled, and being fortunate enough to find the living couple at home, I ventured to give them some paternal advice, and to point them to which they would be better clear the way, when possible, rather than in general public, of Lord St. Simon in peculiar. I invited them to meet him here, and, as you see, I made him keep the appointment. But with no good result, I remarked. His conduct was certainly not very gracious. Ah, Watson, said Holmes, smiling, perhaps you would not be gracious either, if, after all the trouble of wooing and wedding, you found yourself deprived an instant of the bride and of the fortune. I think that we may judge Lord St. Simon very mercifully, and thank Carstairs that we are never likely to find ourselves in the same position. Now, draw up your chair and hand me my violin, for the only problem we still have is to solve how we will deal with these bleak autumn evenings. Okay. That was an interesting case. But, okay, I want to know how Holmes is picturing the flag. A Union Jack in the corner, and then stars and stripes for the rest of it? The heck? It is a very interesting notion, though. But, thank you all for coming in, and thank you, Fred, for the raid. Now let's see who we can pass the raid on to. Who is on? Who's on? If anyone has a raid suggestion, feel free to let me know. And there's a long list of people in here. Why do people put the ones that they're sleeping? That's just silly. I don't know. The fact that there's a game called I'm Just Sleeping is a stranger to me. Who's
Who's on? I think I only drink, well, 2/3 of my pitch black anyway. The name shuffled. Let's see. Do. I read Reeve. Make sure he's still on. Don't know how long he's been on. Check anyway. Oh. And it's so much easier when Dr. Watson is the one narrating the stories as opposed to someone else doing the story for him. Okay, Reeve's only been on half an hour. He should be good for a while. So we are going to raid. I'm going to raid Reeve. I do have my raid message for followers and my raid for subscribers. Feel free to use either one. It doesn't cost much to unlock my moats, so it's good either way. And I will be back on tomorrow night with fairy tales. Possibly drinking, but I haven't decided yet. And I will see you all then, I guess. So, have a good night, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whichever one you may be in. And let's go see what the Star Sailor's up to. Later.